The moment Claire Walker asked her question, the room seemed to pause. Can people learn how to feel close again? It wasn't the kind of thing anyone expected to hear in a dance studio on a rainy Seattle afternoon. The music was low, the wooden floor still warm from the last class, and I had been ready to talk about schedules and fees. Instead, her words landed heavy, honest, and impossible to ignore. Claire stood near the door, one hand still on the handle, like she hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. She was calm on the surface, but something in her eyes told a deeper story. A quiet tiredness, the kind that comes from trying for a long time without knowing how to fix what's broken. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded, giving her space. She took a breath and stepped inside. My husband and I are going to a formal event in a few weeks, she said. A gala, live music, dancing. She smiled, but it faded quickly. We don't dance. We don't really connect anymore. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't blame him. She didn't blame herself. That made it harder. She explained that she wanted lessons, not to impress anyone, not to perform. She wanted to feel confident standing next to her husband again, wanted to feel like they were on the same side of the room. I had taught hundreds of couples across the US and Canada. Most came in laughing, teasing, or nervous. Claire came in quiet, hopeful, and unsure if hope was still allowed. When I told her I wanted to start with her husband, she looked surprised, almost relieved, almost scared. Mark? She asked. You want to teach Mark first? Yes, I said simply, because dancing only works when both people are willing to listen. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, like someone hearing a truth they'd been avoiding. A week later, Mark Walker arrived. He was polite, well-dressed, slightly guarded. The kind of man who had learned how to stay composed even when unsure. He shook my hand firmly and smiled like this was something to get through, not something to experience. I'm not great at this stuff, he said. Claire signed us up. I told him not to worry about steps. That confused him. We didn't turn on music right away. We talked about work, about schedules, about how busy life gets without asking permission. I watched how he spoke fast, efficient, always moving forward. Then I asked him to stand in the center of the room and simply shift his weight from one foot to the other. No counting, I said. Just breathe. He laughed at first, uncomfortable. Then he stopped laughing. Teaching Mark wasn't about dance. It was about slowing down, about noticing silence instead of filling it, about learning that leading someone didn't mean pulling them forward, but being aware of where they already were. You don't rush Claire on purpose, I told him one evening, but you're always 2 steps ahead. That stayed with him. By the 3rd lesson, he had stopped checking his phone. He started asking questions not about footwork, but about connection. When do I know when to move? He asked. When she's ready, I said. The day Claire joined him for the first time felt heavier than the others. She walked in slowly, watching Mark like she was meeting someone familiar but distant. He stood straighter when he saw her, less guarded, more present. I put on soft music and stepped back. Mark offered his hand. Not rushed, not forced. Claire hesitated just a moment, then placed her hand in his. They didn't dance. They barely moved. But something in the room changed. The space between them softened. The tension didn't disappear, but it eased. Claire looked at me once, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask. I could tell she was surprised. By him, by herself. Over the next sessions, their progress was uneven. Some days were light, almost playful. Other days felt stiff and distant. But they kept coming back. That mattered. Claire listened closely when I spoke, but she watched Mark even more. She noticed his effort, his mistakes, his quiet patience. Sometimes, after class, she stayed behind. Not for long. Just enough to ask a question or make a comment about how different things felt. He's trying, she said once, almost to herself. Yes, I replied, and so are you. There was a moment small but important when Mark forgot a step and laughed. Real laughter. Claire laughed too. It wasn't perfect, but it was shared. That was when I realized something. This wasn't just about helping a couple prepare for an event. It was about helping them remember how to stand in the same moment again. But it was also when I noticed how Claire looked at me sometimes. Not often, not openly, just brief glances filled with gratitude, confusion, and something unspoken. I made sure to keep my distance. My role was clear. Still, I knew the situation was fragile. Because when people are vulnerable, emotions don't always stay where they're supposed to. And this story, whatever it was becoming, had only just begun. The night Claire and Mark walked into the studio for their fourth lesson, I noticed a shift immediately. The air was different, lighter, more patient. Mark had started showing up in a way he hadn't before. Present, attentive, even curious. Claire, meanwhile, seemed calmer, less hesitant. As if the walls she carried around her had loosened just enough for her to breathe. I turned on the music softly and stepped back, letting them find each other on the floor. At first, their movements were awkward. Mark still hesitated sometimes, unsure of his lead, while Claire occasionally pulled back, unsure if she should trust it. But there was laughter too, small bursts that made the room feel alive in a way it hadn't before. Not all lessons are about perfections, sometimes. They're about discovering joy in imperfection. After a while, I called a pause. Mark wiped his forehead and glanced at Claire, who smiled in return. The connection between them was subtle but growing, like sunlight through thin clouds. I suggested that they practice leading and following without me correcting every step. Talk to each other with your movement, not with your words, I said. Mark nodded, a quiet determination in his eyes. Claire followed, tentative at first, but slowly letting herself relax into his guidance. When the lesson ended, Mark had left early for work, as he often did. Claire lingered. She walked over to the mirror and studied her reflection, twisting her hair absently. Finally, she spoke softly. "You're really good at this," she said. "At seeing people. Not just how they move, but what they feel." I didn't answer right away. I waited for her to continue. "It's strange," she admitted. "I feel like I understand him better now. But I also understand myself more when I'm here." Her voice was quiet, filled with a kind of wonder. I recognized that feeling, the realization that sometimes growth happens in the spaces you least expect. I told her. Gently, that's the point of learning together. It's not just about dance. It's about noticing, listening, and being present. She nodded, her eyes softening. There was a pause, and then she asked, almost as if testing herself, "Does it always feel this? Different when people start noticing each other again?" I smiled. "It does. And it's fragile, so you have to protect it. Keep showing up." Over the next week, every lesson built on what had already started. Mark had stopped rushing through the motions. He was asking questions now, paying attention to Claire's cues, waiting for her to move rather than dictating every step. She, in turn, had begun to trust him again, responding to his lead with subtle confidence. The transformation wasn't dramatic. There were missteps, awkward pauses, even moments of frustration, but the emotional weight had shifted. What had been heavy, distant, and cautious was becoming lighter, connected, and surprisingly tender. One evening, after a particularly long practice, Claire stayed behind while Mark headed home early for a work meeting. She leaned against the mirror, arms crossed loosely, and spoke more freely than ever before. "It's funny," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to feel close to him again, but somehow, I feel closer to myself when I'm here." I nodded, because noticing another person requires noticing yourself. You're both learning patience, attention, and presence. Those aren't easy lessons, but they're worth it. She smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I guess I didn't realize how much we'd forgotten how to just be with each other." Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. I could see it, the longing for connection that had been buried under routine and silence for years. The following lessons focused less on instruction and more on observation. I encouraged them to lead and follow with trust, to let the steps flow naturally. They were hesitant at first, especially Claire, but soon their movements became fluid. They weren't perfect, but they were authentic. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and shared smiles, small but meaningful gestures that carried the weight of years apart. It was in one of these lessons, as they practiced without music, that I realized how far they had come. Mark's hand was steady, guiding Claire with care rather than control. Claire responded without hesitation, her movements confident, her eyes bright with engagement. They weren't just dancing, they were communicating. The awkward tension had been replaced with understanding, the guarded expressions replaced with soft smiles. After the class, as they packed up, Mark kissed Claire's forehead, a simple gesture, filled with respect and care. Claire looked at me then, not with longing or confusion, but with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for starting with him, for helping us find this again." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. My job wasn't to become part of their story. It was to help them remember what was already there, buried beneath years of habit and distance. And now they had found it again. Weeks later, I received a postcard from Vancouver. No long explanation, just a single line written in Claire's familiar, flowing script. "We danced the whole night." It was enough, because sometimes the greatest lessons aren't about technique or skill, they're about showing up, being present, and helping the right people reconnect with each other. And in that moment, I understood that teaching isn't always about staying in the picture. Sometimes it's about knowing when to step back and let life continue beautifully on its own. From the first hesitant steps to the final dance that night, the walkers had learned something far more lasting than choreography. They had remembered how to feel close, how to trust, and how to share a space without fear. And though I would not be part of their journey beyond that studio, I would always carry the memory of the moment when two people remembered how to move together again, not just on the dance floor, but in life. The soft echoes of their steps, the laughter, and the quiet glances they shared stayed with me long after the music stopped. It reminded me why I taught: to see people reconnect, to witness the fragile magic of human closeness, and to know that even small gestures like a hand extended or a step in sync can heal years of distance. By the end of it all, I understood that this story wasn't just about dancing. It was about hearts opening again, about patience and trust, and about the quiet power of showing up for someone. Claire and Mark had learned it together, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes the greatest lessons don't come from words or instructions. They come from connection, and from the courage to dance again when it feels impossible. And for them, the music had returned.